the other day, on Instagram, Joel T. Connors, if you're interested, I posted a little quiz question, multiple choice, quite easy. Which of these is most closely related to a crocodile? Is it a Komodo dragon, a green iguana, a cane toad, or a blue tit? Obviously, it's a blue tit. So I've drawn up a cladogram. It's effectively a little family tree showing how closely related to one another species are. Now, as you can see on this one, I have omitted several species, but I've got representatives from the major groups of reptiles. So right at the very end, I've put the saltwater crocodile because that is the focus of this one. Now, the last divergence that saltwater crocodiles had with any other groups of reptiles was when they diverged from the dinosaurs. And of course, we can't forget that birds themselves are descended from dinosaurs. In fact, one might argue that birds should be classified as reptiles. And it's because of this recent point of divergence that we say that a blue tit is more closely related to a crocodile than a crocodile is to any other quote-unquote reptile. So this is what we call a paraphyletic group. So birds, yes, they are all one family tree, all have a single point of divergence. There's no weird gaps in there or omissions. So we can say that birds are a monophyletic group, whereas reptiles, so yes, we would include crocodiles, maybe dinosaurs, snakes, lizards, and tortoises. So this is a paraphyletic group because we're judging them based on common features, but we're omitting the blue tits. Of course, there was a follow-up question a few days later. Which of these animals is most closely related to a salmon? Is it a tiger shark, a hagfish, a lamprey, or a blue tit? It's a blue tit. Might not be as obvious as it was the previous one, as I've just explained. I'll go and explain it for you now. So regarding the salmon, here's an interesting one because now you'd say, of course, a salmon, well, it's a fish. Why shouldn't it be more closely related to a shark or a lamprey? Well, it's the same kind of principle as with the blue tits and the crocodiles, but on a much larger scale. So let's start with us. We've got birds and reptiles. I've simplified this just to avoid the whole crocodile conundrum again. But effectively, you see the same thing with the points of divergence. Mammals diverge from reptiles and their descendants some 250 odd million years ago. And then slightly further back, you have the divergence with the point of amphibians. And then even further back, you've got lungfish and things like mud skippers, which come out onto land, and they represent the sort of beginning of vertebrates moving onto land. And then even further back, we've got the divergence between the lungfish and the bony fish. Now, this is where a salmon comes in. So as you can see here, we've got this point of divergence, which means that bony fish are somewhat related to mammals. And you have to go even further back for a point of divergence with sharks or jawless fish. So effectively this whole group here, colour that in properly, we can effectively define them as animals with skeletons. Sharks, of course, don't have true skeletons, and neither do jawless fish. It's at this point that we have the adaptation of jaws. So this is part of something from a famous QI clip where they say there is no such thing as a quote-unquote fish. Now, I don't think this was properly explained in the episode. Effectively, I'll just pause there for the barking dog. Effectively, what's going on is that the demonstration that things like bony fish are more closely related to land animals than they are to sharks, because we share a common ancestor with them to a much closer period in time than they do with sharks. I also posited the question, which of these is most closely related to kelp? A redwood tree, a sea anemone, malaria, or a blue tit? The correct answer is malaria, not a redwood tree or a blue tit. It is an important and popular fact that things are not always as they seem. Kelp is very obviously green, it looks like seaweed, it photosynthesizes, but it's not actually a plant. It's actually a colony of Plasmodium. And of course malaria is a single Plasmodium organism, therefore making kelp much, much more closely related than it is to a redwood tree or some kind of animal like a sea anemone or a blue tit. They're protists, making them an altogether different kingdom to plants or animals. See, in the 1700s, there was a Swedish man who pretended he was a Roman called Linnaeus. He was dubbed a poet who became a naturalist. He wanted to classify the natural world. It's because of him that all animals have got scientific names, including Homo sapiens, Tyrannosaurus rex, everything. Every living organism has a scientific name, genus and species, sometimes subspecies if necessary. He even divided up the vertebrates into the groups that we would commonly recognise today. The mammals, the birds, the reptiles, the amphibians and the fish. Those are sort of the groups that you'll be taught at school. And just a little point of contention directly to Mrs. Cutler, I doubt she's watching, but it is mammal, not animal. Linnaeus died in the late 1700s, long before Darwin was able to publish his theory of evolution by means of natural selection. So this means that Linnaeus was following a creationist view of the world rather than a more naturalist view based on natural selection, where there is no creator, there is no divine plan, and quite importantly, the notion that nature doesn't exist to fit into our own little categories. Even the biological species concept has been brought into question. Again, what you're probably taught at school is that a species is a population of any given creature that can breed genetically viable offspring between themselves. This doesn't account for hybrids that can still breed, and it doesn't account for self-replicating organisms like Mexican whiptail lizards or bacteria. Linnaean taxonomy and phylogeny is a funny thing. We're trying to create categories to put something which naturally occurs into, which they don't want to fit into. They don't exist to fit into categories. They're just existing and adapting and sometimes radiating and going extinct and whatnot. And of course, how could Linnaeus have known that the birds were descended from the dinosaurs? In fact, the word dinosaur hadn't even been invented by the time Linnaeus died. So there you have it. I felt chicken was a little cliche, so that's why I went for blue tit anyway. But just goes to show, the world isn't necessarily as easy as it is to understand as we might initially think.